Before I begin, I'd like to invite you to settle in, perhaps with a cup of tea, because the story I'm about to share is one that unfolded over many months, filled with moments that squeezed my heart and others that, eventually, brought a quiet kind of peace. It's about a piece of advice, dismissed with laughter by my own grandkids, Liam and Chloe, advice they later came to understand with a clarity only hardship can bring. They said I was old-fashioned, that my ways were outdated. But as you'll see, some truths are timeless. This is the story of how they learned that, and how they came back, not in triumph, but in desperation, begging for the very help they once scorned. I wonder if any of you have experienced something similar, watching younger generations stumble when a little inherited wisdom might have smoothed their path. Let me know your thoughts after you've heard my tale.
Part 1.
My name is Alara, and I've seen 78 winters come and go. Each one has etched a little more experience onto my soul, like the rings of an old, sturdy oak. My late husband, Arthur, and I, we weathered many storms together, financial lean times when the children were small, illnesses that tested our resolve, and the everyday challenges of building a life and a home from very little. Arthur used to say, "Slow and steady wins the race, Alara," and while it wasn't always exciting, it was reliable. It was a mantra that saw us through, allowing us to build a comfortable, if modest, nest egg and a home filled more with love and common sense than with fleeting luxuries. After he passed, those principles became my bedrock, guiding my own finances and the quiet rhythm of my days. My greatest joys now are my small garden, my books, and, of course, my family. My son, David, and his wife, Sarah, are good people, though perhaps a little too easily swayed by the glittering promises of the modern world. And then there are Liam and Chloe, my grandchildren, 23 and 21 respectively. Bright sparks, both of them, full of the restless energy of youth, convinced that the world was their oyster, ready to be cracked open with the newest app or the latest trend. I love them dearly, with a fierceness that only a grandmother can know, but in recent years, a subtle chasm had begun to open between my world and theirs. It wasn't just the technology they were glued to, or the slang that often left me bewildered. It was a fundamental difference in how we viewed the path to a stable and fulfilling life. I'd offer little nuggets of what I thought was wisdom. "A penny saved is a penny earned, my dears," or "make sure you understand the fine print before you sign anything." And they'd smile, pat my hand, and exchange a look that clearly said, "Sweet old grandma," still living in the dark ages. Their parents, David and Sarah, usually just chuckled along, proud of their children's ambition, their grasp of all things new and fast-paced, perhaps even a little embarrassed by my seemingly antiquated
Caution.
I remember one Sunday dinner, Liam was talking excitedly about some new cryptocurrency he'd heard about from an online influencer. "It's the future, Grandma. You buy it now, and in a year, you're set for life." I'd merely asked him if he understood how it generated value, or what would happen if this influencer disappeared. He'd laughed, a bright, dismissive sound. "Oh, Grandma, you wouldn't get it. It's complex blockchain stuff," Chloe had chimed in. "Yeah, Grandma, it's not like buying savings bonds." The words weren't intentionally cruel, I suppose, but they carried a weight of dismissal that settled uncomfortably in my chest. My quiet worry for them began to grow, a little knot in my stomach that tightened with each new, dazzling scheme they'd recount. I saw them chasing butterflies, beautiful and alluring, but with no thought to where they might land when the wind changed.
Part 2.
The real turning point, the incident that set everything in motion, came on a bright spring afternoon. The daffodils were trumpeting their yellow joy in my garden, and I just put a batch of scones in the oven, expecting David, Sarah, and the grandkids for tea. Liam and Chloe arrived first, practically vibrating with excitement. They couldn't even wait for their parents, or for the scones to cool. They burst into the kitchen, faces flushed, eyes shining with an almost feverish light. "Grandma, we have the most amazing news," Chloe announced, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Liam, ever the more serious seeming of the two, though just as caught up in this particular enthusiasm, spread a glossy brochure on my kitchen table, right next to my well-worn cookbook. "It's called Nova Spark Global," he declared, his voice brimming with confidence. "It's a revolutionary e-commerce platform using AI-driven analytics to connect artisan producers in developing countries directly with premium global markets. We're going to be regional coordinators." It sounded impressive, full of buzzwords I only vaguely understood. They explained that it involved a significant upfront investment, pooling all their savings, which I knew wasn't a colossal amount but was everything to them, and they were also hoping their parents would co-sign a sizable loan. "The projections are incredible, Grandma," Chloe gushed, pointing to a graph that soared upwards like a rocket. "We'll make back our investment in 6 months, and then it's pure profit. We could be traveling the world, managing our business from laptops on a beach by next year." I listened patiently, my gaze traveling from their eager faces to the complicated diagrams on the brochure. I picked it up, felt the slick paper, noted the absence of any concrete details about these artisan producers or the AI-driven analytics. It was all grand vision, very little substance. When they finally paused for breath, I began to ask my questions, the kind Arthur always taught me to ask. "Who are the people behind this company, dears? What's their track record? How are these artisan producers vetted? And what happens if there are issues with quality control or shipping across continents? What's your specific role as a regional coordinator? What skills and experience do you have for that? And this loan, what's the interest rate? What's the plan if those projected profits don't materialize as quickly as this graph suggests?" My questions were met with a flicker of impatience in Liam's eyes, a slight dimming of Chloe's effervescence. "It's all cutting edge, Grandma," Liam said, a touch defensively. "They have a whole system for that. It's an established international company, just launching in our region." I took a deep breath. "My dears," I began gently, "it sounds very exciting, and I know you're both so clever and eager. But a venture like this, with such a large initial outlay and so many unknowns, it feels very risky. Perhaps you could start smaller? Test the waters in a more limited way. Don't put all your savings, and certainly not borrowed money, into something so new and, forgive me, unproven. Build a safety net first. Arthur and we once had a chance to invest in a sure thing when your father was just a boy. Everyone was doing it. We looked into it, asked the hard questions, and it just didn't feel right. We held back. 6 months later, the whole thing collapsed, and many of our friends lost everything. Sometimes the old ways, caution, due diligence, not putting all your eggs in one basket, they're old for a reason. They've stood the test of time." There was a moment of silence. Liam looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at Liam. And then it came, the laughter. Not a gentle chuckle, but a full-blown, slightly hysterical burst of mirth. Liam leaned against the counter, shaking his head. "Oh, Grandma, that's such boomer logic," he managed, wiping a tear of amusement from his eye. Chloe giggled. "Seriously, Grandma, don't put all your eggs in one basket. This isn't like buying chickens for the farm. This is the new economy. You just don't understand. It's dynamic, fast-moving. If you don't jump in, you get left behind." Just then, David and Sarah walked in, drawn by the laughter. "What's so funny?" Sarah asked, smiling. Liam, still chuckling, tried to explain. "Grandma's giving us her old-fashioned advice about Nova Spark, telling us it's too risky." David smiled indulgently at me. "Now, Mum, I know you mean well, but Liam and Chloe have really researched this." "It sounds like a fantastic opportunity," Sarah nodded. "They're young. They should take some risks. That's how you get ahead these days." The scones in the oven suddenly seemed to have lost all their aroma. The bright spring day felt a little colder. Their laughter, their parents' casual dismissal, it wasn't just about the advice. It was about me, my entire life's experience, rendered irrelevant, comical. The sting was unexpectedly sharp, a deep, profound hurt that settled in my chest like a stone. I simply nodded, a tight little smile on my lips. "Well, I hope it all works out for you then, dears," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. The joy had gone out of the afternoon. Part 3. After they'd gone, leaving behind a half-eaten plate of scones and the glossy Nova Spark brochure on my table. The house felt unnervingly silent. The echo of their laughter, particularly Liam's boomer logic comment, seemed to bounce off the familiar walls of my kitchen, each repetition a fresh little jab. I sank into my armchair in the living room, the one Arthur always favored, and let the hurt wash over me. It wasn't anger, not yet, but a deep, weary sadness. It felt as though the very foundations of my life, the wisdom gleaned from years of careful navigation through its unpredictable currents, had been casually swept aside as ancient relics, useless in this shiny new world they inhabited. I thought of all the times I'd sacrificed, scrimped, and saved, not just for myself and Arthur, but to ensure David had a good start in life, to be able to help with down payments for their first homes, to always have a little something tucked away for emergencies for them. And now, that careful, accumulated wisdom was a punchline. The following Tuesday, I had my regular coffee morning with Mrs. Henderson, Martha, my dearest friend for over 50 years. Martha, with her no-nonsense attitude and her equally sharp mind, had seen even more winters than I had. I recounted the incident, the grand Nova Spark scheme, the laughter, the dismissal. Martha listened patiently, her gaze never leaving mine, occasionally punctuating my story with a sympathetic, or a knowing nod. When I finished, she reached across the small table at the Cup and Saucer Cafe and patted my hand, her touch firm and reassuring. "Oh, Elara, dear," she said, her voice a comforting balm. "Don't you let those young whippersnappers get you down. They're full of beans and bluster, convinced they've reinvented the wheel. We were young once too, remember? Thought we knew it all." A wry smile touched her lips. "They'll learn," she continued, stirring her coffee with slow, deliberate movements. "They always do. And usually it's the hard way, because that's the only teacher some folks will listen to."
Your advice was sound, Elara.
Solid as a rock. "They're just too dazzled by the glitter to see the gold you offered them." Martha's words, her unwavering validation, were like a lifeline. She didn't just offer sympathy. She affirmed my worth, the value of my experience. Walking home from the cafe, a new sense of resolve began to crystallize within me. It wasn't a desire for them to fail, not at all. My heart ached at the very thought of their bright hopes crashing down. But I realized I couldn't force them to listen. I couldn't make them value what they were so determined to scorn. I would not, I decided, offer any more unsolicited advice on this Nova Spark venture. I would not chase after them with warnings or "I told you so's" disguised as concern. My door would always be open, my love for them unwavering, but they had chosen their path, and now they had to walk it. I would simply watch and wait and pray that the lessons they were bound to learn wouldn't be too devastating. In the weeks that followed, I saw them occasionally. They were caught up in a whirlwind of activity, setting up a home office in their shared apartment, attending online training webinars for Nova Spark, posting enthusiastically on social media about #entrepreneurlife and #globalimpact. Their posts were full of carefully curated images, laptops open in trendy cafes, inspirational quotes overlaid on stock photos of exotic locations, pronouncements about disrupting the industry. There was a brittle energy about them, a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach their eyes when I saw them in person. But they were committed, fully immersed in their new world, and I kept my counsel, offering only polite smiles and general well wishes. Part 4. The summer months unfurled, warm and languid, much like any other summer, yet beneath the surface, a subtle tension was building. My garden thrived under the sun, the roses blooming in a riot of color, the tomatoes ripening on the vine. It was a season of predictable growth, of reward for patient tending, a stark contrast to the unpredictable trajectory of Nova Spark Global. Liam and Chloe's initial flurry of social media posts, once daily pronouncements of imminent success, began to dwindle. The #BossLife hashtags became less frequent. When I did see them at family gatherings or when they dropped by, usually at their parents' urging, I suspected, their earlier manic excitement had been replaced by a more subdued, almost defensive air. If I asked, very gently. How are things going with the new venture, dears? The answers were vague. Oh, it's busy, Grandma, really busy, Liam would say, quickly changing the subject to the weather or a football game. Chloe would offer a tight smile and murmur, lots of groundwork, you know. Building the foundations, but their eyes told a different story. There were new shadows beneath them, a flicker of anxiety they couldn't quite conceal. David and Sarah, too, seemed less effusive about their children's amazing opportunity. When I'd inquire with my son, he'd sigh, well, Mum, these things take time. They're hitting a few logistical hurdles, I think. Import regulations are more complicated than they anticipated. And finding reliable artisan partners isn't as straightforward as the brochure made it sound, Sarah would add, with a worried frown. They're working such long hours. I hardly see them smile anymore. But they insist it's just the initial slog, that it'll pay off. I knew that initial slog was often a euphemism for things aren't going to plan. I'd seen it before. Arthur and I had once considered a small mail-order business in our younger days. The concept was sound, but the realities of inventory management, shipping costs, and unreliable suppliers quickly became a quagmire. We'd pulled back, learning a valuable lesson with minimal financial damage. I suspected Liam and Chloe were now deep in that quagmire, but with far more at stake. One afternoon, Chloe called me. It was unusual for her to call midweek just to chat. Her voice was small, hesitant. Grandma, she said, I was just wondering, do you remember that time Uncle Frank invested in that emu farm? The one that went bust. I remembered it well. My brother-in-law, always chasing the next big thing.
Yes, dear, I replied carefully.
Why do you ask? There was a pause. Oh, no reason, she said a little too quickly. Just something someone mentioned. He lost a lot of money, didn't he? He did. I confirmed. It was a hard lesson for him. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the unspoken anxieties crackling down the line. Then, as if catching herself, her voice brightened artificially. Anyway, just a random thought. Gotta go, Grandma. Webinar starting soon. Love you. And she hung up. My heart ached for her. The cracks were definitely showing. The glossy veneer of NovaSpark Global was beginning to chip, revealing something far less appealing underneath. They were learning. I sensed that brochures and projections were one thing, and the messy, complex reality of business was quite another. The laughter from that spring afternoon echoed in my memory, but now it sounded hollow, almost tragic.
Part 5.
As autumn approached, painting the leaves in hues of gold and crimson, the vibrant colors seemed to mock the increasingly pallid prospects of NovaSpark. The pressure on Liam and Chloe was becoming palpable. Liam, who had always been the more outwardly confident of the two, grew increasingly irritable. During a family Sunday lunch, a casual question from his father about when they expected their first big shipment of artisan goods to arrive was met with a sharp, "It's complicated, Dad. These things don't just happen overnight." His face was tight with stress, his usual easygoing manner completely gone. Chloe, on the other hand, became more withdrawn. She picked at her food, her gaze often distant, and jumped whenever her phone buzzed, a hunted look in her eyes. The laptops on a beach dream had clearly evaporated, replaced by what looked like endless, anxious hours staring at screens in their cramped apartment, which now seemed less like a trendy home office and more like a command center for a failing mission. I learned through David, who was becoming visibly more worried about them, that they had encountered significant problems with their primary supplier, a supposed cooperative of weavers in a remote village. Payments had been made, but the promised goods were either not materializing, or what little did arrive was of such poor quality, it was unsellable. The AI-driven analytics of NovaSpark Global, it seemed, hadn't accounted for basic human fallibility or, perhaps, outright deception from contacts further up the NovaSpark chain. There were whispers, too, that the parent company itself was facing scrutiny, that the entire operation might be less than stable. One evening, Sarah called me, her voice trembling. "Ilara," she said, "I'm so worried. Liam and Chloe had a terrible argument. I think they might be trying to take out another loan, a personal one, to cover some unexpected costs for NovaSpark. David is furious. He told them absolutely not. My heart sank. More debt on top of existing debt, chasing losses with more risk. It was a classic sign of desperation. A few days later, Liam approached me indirectly. He called, his voice carefully casual. Hey, Grandma, just checking in. Say, you know how you're always so good with your finances. I was just wondering hypothetically, of course, if someone needed a short-term bridging loan, just a small amount, to tide them over until a big payment comes through, what would be the best way to go about that? I knew exactly what he was asking. My response was gentle but firm. Liam, dear, I said, my finances are carefully managed to ensure I have security in my old age. My income is fixed, and I don't have spare cash for speculative ventures, as you put it. Borrowing more money when a business is struggling is often like pouring water into a leaky bucket. Sometimes, it's wiser to assess the leaks first. There was a long silence on his end. Right, he said finally, his voice flat. Yeah, of course. Just a hypothetical. Thanks, Grandma, he hung up. The conversation left me with a heavy heart. The joy they'd felt in laughing at my outdated advice was now a distant memory, replaced by the grim reality of their predicament. I continued to observe, my silence a cloak for my growing concern. The universe, it seemed, was preparing to deliver its lesson, and I could only hope they would be strong enough to receive it. The wind was definitely changing, and the butterflies they had been chasing were being buffeted towards a very hard landing. Part 6. The crash, when it came, was swift and brutal, like a sudden winter storm after a deceptively mild autumn. I heard about it first from a distraught Sarah, her voice cracking over the phone. It's all gone, Alara. Everything. Nova Spark, it was a sham. The whole international company is collapsing, founders have disappeared, and Liam and Chloe, they've lost all their savings and the loan. Oh God, the loan David co-signed. Her words tumbled out in a torrent of grief and panic. Apparently, an investigative journalism piece had broken online, exposing Nova Spark Global as an elaborate pyramid scheme, preying on enthusiastic but inexperienced young entrepreneurs with promises of high returns and a glamorous lifestyle. The artisan producers were largely fictitious, the AI-driven analytics a meaningless smokescreen. The entire edifice had crumbled overnight, leaving a trail of financial ruin and shattered dreams in its wake. My first thought was for my grandchildren. The money was one thing, a harsh lesson in itself, but the blow to their confidence, their youthful optimism, would be devastating. Later that evening, my doorbell rang. I knew, even before I opened it, who would be standing there. Liam and Chloe stood on my doorstep, looking like ghosts of their former selves. Chloe's eyes were red-rimmed and swollen from crying, her face pale and drawn. Liam, who had always carried himself with such assurance, was slumped, his shoulders bowed, his expression one of utter desolation. David and Sarah were with them, hovering in the background, their faces etched with worry and a touch of shame. I ushered them into the living room, the same room where, months before, my advice had been met with such derision. The silence was thick, broken only by Chloe's stifled sobs. Liam stared at the carpet, seemingly unable to meet my gaze. Finally, he looked up, his eyes filled with a raw, painful honesty I hadn't seen in him before. Grandma, he began, his voice hoarse, cracking with emotion. We messed up.
Royally.
Everything you warned us about, every single thing had happened. Chloe let out a small wail and buried her face in her hands. We were so arrogant, she choked out between sobs. We thought we knew everything. We laughed at you, and you were just trying to protect us. Liam took a shaky breath. Nova Spark is gone. It was all lies. Our savings gone. The loan. Dad is on the hook for it. We don't know what to do. We've ruined everything. He looked directly at me then, the last vestiges of his pride stripped away, leaving only a desperate vulnerability. Grandma, he pleaded, his voice barely a whisper. You were right. You were right about everything. We were so stupid, so disrespectful. We're so sorry. Please, can you help us? We don't know who else to turn to, the words hung in the air. The laughter from that spring day was a million miles away, replaced by the stark, painful clarity of their ruin. My heart ached for them, for the harshness of the lesson they had endured. There was no triumph in this moment, no satisfaction in being proven so devastatingly correct. There was only a profound sadness for their lost innocence and the difficult road that now lay ahead of them. I looked at their tear-streaked faces, at the despair in their eyes, and I knew that whatever came next, it would be a journey we would have to navigate together. Part 7. I let their confession hang in the quiet room for a long moment, allowing the weight of their words, their raw despair, to settle. My own heart felt heavy, a mixture of sorrow for their pain and a quiet, somber vindication that brought no joy. I looked at Liam, then at Chloe, their faces pale and tear-streaked under the soft lamplight. David and Sarah stood by helplessly, their expressions a mirror of their children's distress, tinged with their own parental guilt. There was no "I told you so" on my lips, nor in my heart. The universe had already delivered that message with brutal efficiency. Instead, I took a slow, steadying breath. "My dears," I began, my voice gentle but firm, "thank you for your honesty. It takes courage to admit when you've made a mistake, especially one of this magnitude." I paused, then continued, "Before we talk about help, I need you to tell me, in your own words, exactly what went wrong. Not just with Novaspark, but with your approach to it. What do you think you should have done differently, looking back now?" It wasn't meant to be an interrogation, but a pathway to understanding, for them as much as for me. Liam began, hesitantly at first, then with growing clarity as he recounted the red flags they had ignored, the due diligence they had skipped, mesmerized by the promises of quick riches. Chloe added her own reflections, her voice small but steady, about how they'd dismissed caution as negativity, how they'd been so eager to believe in the dream that they hadn't questioned the reality. They talked about the pressure they'd felt to appear successful, the seductive allure of the #entrepreneur life image, and how it had blinded them to the warning signs. As they spoke, I could see the dawning of genuine insight in their eyes. They were articulating the very lessons I had tried to impart months earlier, lessons they were now learning through the harsh curriculum of experience. When they had finished, a fragile silence returned. "All right," I said. "I understand. And yes, I will help you. But it won't be a simple bailout. Giving you money to pay off these debts would be like putting a bandage on a broken bone without setting it first. The wound might be covered, but it won't heal properly. You need to rebuild, not just financially, but in your understanding of how to navigate these challenges." I outlined my conditions, my voice calm and measured. "Firstly," I stated, "you will both find stable, part-time jobs. It might not be glamorous. It might feel like a step back, but you need to start earning consistently to begin tackling this debt yourselves. Every penny you earn will be a testament to your commitment to fix this." Their faces showed a flicker of dismay at the thought of menial jobs, but they nodded slowly. "Secondly," I continued, "we will create a strict budget. Together. You will track every single expense, and we will review it weekly. You will learn to live within your means, to distinguish between needs and wants." "This is non-negotiable." I saw David and Sarah exchange a relieved glance. "Thirdly, we will make a realistic plan to address the loan that your father co-signed. This will be the priority. It will involve sacrifices from you both. No more trendy cafes, no new gadgets, no unnecessary outings. Every spare penny will go towards that." Finally, I looked them each in the eye. "And lastly, this experience must be a lesson, not just a temporary setback. I will help you learn about financial literacy, about saving, about prudent investment, about the value of hard work and patience. But you must be willing to learn, truly willing, without resentment or a longing for shortcuts." My tone was unwavering, but my gaze was filled with the love I had always felt for them. "I am offering you a hand up, not a handout. This will be a long and difficult road, but if you are serious about making amends and rebuilding your lives on a more solid foundation, I will walk it with you." Every step of the way, Chloe was crying again, but this time, there was a glimmer of hope in her tears. Liam just nodded, his expression one of profound gratitude and a new, sober determination. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered. "We understand. We'll do whatever it takes." Part 8. The weeks that followed were a stark contrast to the heady, misguided ambition of their Nova Spark days. True to their word, Liam and Chloe began the difficult process of facing their new reality. Liam, who had dreamed of being a global coordinator, found a job stocking shelves at the local supermarket during the early morning shift. Chloe, who had envisioned managing artisan partnerships from exotic locations, started working part-time at a bakery, her days filled with the scent of yeast and the rhythm of kneading dough. There was an undeniable humility in their acceptance of these roles. I knew it wasn't easy. I saw the fatigue in their eyes when they came over for our weekly budgeting sessions, their hands sometimes aching from unfamiliar labor. There were moments of frustration, of quiet despair, especially in the beginning. Chloe once confessed, her voice thick with unshed tears, "Grandma, some of my old friends saw me serving coffee today. They looked so surprised. I felt so ashamed I listened, then gently reminded her, there is no shame in honest work, Chloe. The only shame is in deceit or in refusing to take responsibility. You are doing what needs to be done. Hold your head high." Our budgeting sessions became a cornerstone of their new routine. We'd sit around my kitchen table, the same table where they'd once laughed at my caution, now spread with bank statements, pay stubs, and meticulously kept expense logs. I taught them about tracking income and outgoings, about differentiating fixed costs from discretionary spending, about the power of compound interest in reverse when dealing with debt. I shared stories from my own past, of lean times when Arthur and I had to make every shilling count, of how we'd learned to find joy in simple things, not in material possessions. They listened this time, truly listened. The dismissive glances were gone, replaced by expressions of earnest concentration, occasionally punctuated by questions that showed they were genuinely trying to understand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a shift began to occur. The initial humiliation of their circumstances started to fade, replaced by a quiet pride in their ability to meet their obligations, however small the progress seemed. They began to talk about their colleagues at work, not with condescension, but with a newfound respect for the everyday struggles and resilience of ordinary people. David and Sarah, too, were part of this journey. They attended some of our budgeting sessions, learning alongside their children. There was a new gravity in their demeanor, a deeper appreciation for the old-fashioned wisdom they had once so easily dismissed in my favor of their children's fleeting enthusiasms. They were actively involved in the repayment plan for the loan, making their own sacrifices to help accelerate the process. One evening, after a particularly grueling review of their finances, Liam looked up from the spreadsheets, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, Grandma," he said, "stocking shelves isn't exactly glamorous, but there's a satisfaction in seeing the order, in knowing I've done a solid day's work. And my manager, Mr. Henderson's nephew, actually, he's a decent bloke. He started on the shop floor too," I smiled. It was a small thing, but it was a sign. They were learning not just about money, but about value, about character, about the quiet dignity of perseverance. The road back was indeed hard, paved with sacrifices and uncomfortable truths, but they were walking it, step by painstaking step. And I walked beside them, not carrying their burden, but helping them find the strength to carry it themselves. Part 9. Nearly 2 years slipped by, marked by the steady rhythm of seasons and the equally steady, though far less dramatic, progress of Liam and Chloe's recovery. The frantic energy of their Nova Spark era was a distant memory, replaced by a quieter, more grounded approach to life. The debt, once a terrifying mountain, had been significantly reduced through their diligent efforts and the family's combined austerity. It wasn't entirely gone, but it was manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. Liam had stayed on at the supermarket. He'd impressed his manager with his work ethic and reliability, and had recently been promoted to a deputy team leader position. It wasn't global coordination, but it was a responsibility he took seriously, and it came with a sense of accomplishment that was genuine, earned. He was even talking about looking into management training programs offered by the company. "It's not what I imagined, Grandma," he told me one afternoon as we pruned roses in my garden, "but it's real. And the people I work with, they're good people. No one's trying to sell you a dream that's too good to be true, Chloe," after her stint at the bakery, had discovered a latent talent for cake decorating. She'd started a small, home-based business, taking orders for birthdays and local events. Her creations were beautiful, crafted with a patience and attention to detail she hadn't known she possessed. She marketed it modestly, through word of mouth and a simple local webpage, building her reputation slowly, customer by satisfied customer. "It's not Novaspark," she said, a wry smile playing on her lips as she showed me photos of her latest wedding cake. "But the profit margins are clear, and I actually understand my supply chain. It's flour, sugar, and butter from the cash and carry." The laughter we shared then was different from the laughter that had once stung me so deeply. This was warm, knowing, built on shared experience and mutual respect. Their relationship with me had undergone a profound transformation. They no longer sought me out merely for Sunday dinner or obligatory holiday visits. They came for advice, genuinely seeking my perspective on everything from Liam's work dilemmas to Chloe's business ideas. They'd listen intently, ask thoughtful questions, and often, they'd follow through on the suggestions we discussed. The outdated wisdom was now seen as timeless. One evening, I overheard Chloe talking to a friend on the phone who was considering a risky investment. "Honestly, Sarah," Chloe was saying, "my grandma always says if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And you know what? She's usually right. Maybe just do a bit more research. Start small. Don't bet the farm on it." I turned away, a quiet smile on my face. My vindication wasn't in their past failure, but in this present moment of their growth, in the wisdom they had not only learned but were now embodying and sharing. David and Sarah, too, had changed. They were more cautious, more inclined to look beneath the shiny surface of things, and their appreciation for my steady, if unspectacular, approach to life had deepened considerably. Our family bonds, though tested, had ultimately been strengthened, forged anew in the crucible of shared adversity and rediscovered respect.
Part 10.
Looking back now, from the vantage point of a few more winters, the whole Novaspark episode feels like a distant storm that, despite its fury, ultimately cleared the air and watered the ground for new growth. The pain of their initial dismissal, that sharp sting of being laughed off as outdated, has long since faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction that is far removed from any sense underscore of triumph. It's the satisfaction of a gardener who sees young saplings, once bent and battered by a gale, straighten up and grow strong, their roots now deeper and more resilient. My peace comes from witnessing their transformation. Liam is now a well-respected assistant manager at the supermarket, saving diligently for a down payment on a small apartment. He talks about stability and long-term prospects, words that would have bored him to tears a few years ago. Chloe's cake business is flourishing in a modest, sustainable way. She's even hired a part-time assistant. She recently showed me her business plan for the next year, full of sensible projections and contingency measures. "Learn from the best, Grandma," she'd said with a wink, tapping the meticulously organized spreadsheet. The outdated advice, it turns out, was simply timeless wisdom, principles of caution, diligence, and integrity that hold true regardless of how rapidly the world changes or how sophisticated technology becomes. The allure of the quick and easy will always exist, but the value of steady effort and sound judgment remains constant. My relationship with my grandchildren is richer and more authentic than it ever was. The laughter we share now is genuine, easy, rooted in affection and a deep, mutual understanding. They still roll their eyes good-naturedly at some of my old-fashioned quirks, but there's a warmth in it, a respect that was absent before. They see me not as a relic of a bygone era, but as a source of continuity, a living link to enduring values. Last Sunday, Liam was telling me about a young colleague who was being tempted by a new online scheme promising instant wealth. "I told him, Grandma," Liam said, shaking his head. "I told him my story." I said, "Mate, if it sounds like a shortcut to $1 million, it's probably a shortcut to a big headache." I think he actually listened. There's a touch of melancholy, of course, for the hardship they endured, for the harshness of the lesson. No grandparent ever wants to see their loved one suffer. But there's also a profound gratitude that they navigated the storm, learned from it, and emerge stronger, wiser, and more compassionate individuals. My role as a matriarch, a keeper of the family's accumulated wisdom, feels not just restored but enriched. My legacy, I hope, will not be in any material possessions I leave behind, but in these timeless principles they have now embraced. As I sit here in my quiet living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, I feel a deep sense of peace. The world will keep spinning, new trends will come and go, but the foundations of a good life, honesty, hard work, prudence, and love, remain unshakable. And that, I suppose, is a truth that never gets outdated. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it offered some food for thought.